You already know Loki, the villain, the shapeshifter, the god of lies. That's the version Marvel sold you. But here's what nobody tells you. The real Loki never had a plan. He never wanted power. He never tried to take over anything. And yet, the gods chained him to a rock with the intestines of his own son and left him there until the end of the world. The question is, what did he actually do to deserve that? And more importantly, did he deserve it at all? Before we get to Loki, you need to understand one thing. He was not a god of evil. He was not a god of lies. He did not even have a temple dedicated to him. He was something the ancient Norse called a trickster. And a trickster is a very specific type of person. Imagine a world with rules. Not laws, exactly, just things everyone agrees on. You don't spit in the well. You don't question the elders. You don't show up uninvited to a feast and tell everyone exactly what you think of them. Why not? Because you just don't. Everyone knows that. The trickster looks at those rules and feels nothing. No respect, no fear, no desire to follow them. Not because he is evil, not because he has a plan, but because rules without a real reason are just habits, and habits bore him. So he spits in the well, just to see what happens next. That is Loki. A mind without a sense of responsibility. Brilliant, restless, completely allergic to boredom. He caused more problems for the gods than every giant in Jotunheim combined, and then usually solved those same problems himself. Because chaos without a resolution is just a mess, and Loki had standards. To understand Loki, you need to understand the world he lived in. And that world was nothing like Greece or Egypt. In Egypt, the gods passed power from father to son in a clean, straight line. In Greece, one generation of gods destroyed the previous one and then ruled in peace. Messy, but predictable. The Norse world was different. From the very beginning, it was built on a conflict that never ended and was never supposed to end. In the beginning, there was nothing, just a vast, empty abyss. No light, no time, no sound. Then rivers appeared. Nobody knows where they came from. The rivers froze. The ice mixed with heat from the south, and something began to form in the darkness. The first living being was called Ymir. Not a god, not a giant, just the first thing that existed. He was so large he could not stand or move. He simply lay there and fed on the milk of a divine cow that had also appeared from nowhere. The cow licked the ice, and from the ice a figure slowly emerged. A god named Buri. His grandson Odin would eventually rule everything, but first, Odin and his brothers killed Ymir. They took his body apart and built the world from the pieces. His blood became the oceans. His bones became the mountains. His skull became the sky. They found worms inside his corpse and turned them into dwarves, as one does. The giants, Ymir's descendants, survived the flood of his blood and never forgot what the gods did to their ancestor. That hatred became the foundation of everything. Gods on one side, giants on the other. An eternal war with no possible resolution. 9 worlds, Asgard for the gods, Jotunheim for the giants, Midgard for humans, who appeared later when Odin carved 2 figures from trees and gave them life. And somewhere in the middle of all this tension, caught between 2 worlds, belonging to neither, was Loki. Loki was born wrong. Not evil, not cursed, just wrong for the world he landed in. His father was a giant, his mother was a goddess. In a world built entirely on the hatred between those 2 groups, Loki arrived as living proof that the line between them was not as clear as everyone pretended. Mixed children were rare. They were not exactly welcomed. And yet somehow Loki ended up in Asgard, drinking with the gods, traveling with Odin and Thor. Sworn brother of Odin himself, a blood oath that Odin never broke, no matter what Loki did. Nobody truly loved him. Nobody truly trusted him. But nobody could get rid of him either, because Loki was useful, dangerously, frustratingly, irreplaceably useful. When the gods had a problem that brute force could not solve, which was most problems, they turned to Loki. When a plan needed to be more clever than anyone in Asgard was capable of, they turned to Loki. When Thor needed someone to travel with who could actually think, they turned to Loki. He could change his shape more easily than any creature alive. A falcon, a salmon, a mare, a fly. He transformed so naturally that it seemed less like magic and more like he simply had no fixed form to begin with. He had at least 6 children. 2 were normal, sons born to his wife Sigyn, a goddess who loved him with a loyalty that made absolutely no sense given everything he put her through. The other 4 were not normal at all. With a giantess named Angrboda, he had 3 children that the gods would come to fear more than anything in existence. Fenrir, a wolf so enormous that when the gods finally understood how large he would grow, they spent years trying to find a chain that could hold him. Jormungandr, the world serpent, a creature that grew until it wrapped around the entire world and bit its own tail in the depths of the ocean. And Hel, a daughter who became the goddess of death and ruler of the realm where everyone who did not die in battle was sent to spend eternity doing absolutely nothing. Lovely family. The gods knew what these children would become. They knew because the prophecies told them. Fenrir would kill Odin, the world serpent would kill Thor, Hel would receive the dead of Ragnarok, and they blamed Loki. Which was fair. He did father them. What was less fair was everything else they blamed him for. Every problem that had no obvious cause, every disaster that arrived without warning, every moment when the perfect order of Asgard cracked slightly and something uncomfortable came through. That was always Loki. Sometimes because he caused it, sometimes just because it was easier than admitting the order was never as perfect as they thought. In the beginning, Loki's tricks were almost harmless. Almost. There was the time he cut off the golden hair of Sif, Thor's wife, while she was sleeping. Why? No particular reason. He was bored. The hair was beautiful. It seemed like an interesting thing to do. Thor was not philosophical about it. He found Loki immediately and explained in very simple terms what would happen to him if Sif's hair was not restored. Thor was not a complicated man. But he was very large and currently holding a hammer. Loki went to find the dwarves. The dwarves of Nidavellir were the greatest craftsmen in existence. They could forge anything. And Loki, facing the prospect of Thor removing his head from his shoulders, was very motivated to negotiate. He convinced 2 brothers named Brock and Eitri to craft new hair from pure gold. Threads so fine they would move like real hair, grow like real hair, be completely indistinguishable from real hair. They agreed, and while they were at it, Loki talked them into making a few extra things. A spear for Odin, a magical ship for another god, just to make everyone less angry. It worked. The gods were pleased. Loki was forgiven. And that should have been the end of it. But the dwarves would not stop talking about how good they were, the greatest craftsmen in existence, the finest work in all 9 worlds. Nothing they made was less than perfect. On and on and on. Loki listened to this for as long as he could stand it. Then he made a bet. He wagered his own head that Brock and Eitri could not craft 3 more items as valuable as the ones they had just made. The dwarves agreed immediately. 2 immediately. Loki probably should have noticed that. They began forging. The first item went into the forge, and Loki, deciding that losing his head was not actually acceptable, turned himself into a fly and bit Brock on the hand while he was working the bellows. Brock did not flinch. Out of the forge came a mechanical boar with golden bristles that could run across the sky faster than any horse and light the darkness with its shining coat. Unique. Extraordinary. Definitely as valuable as anything Loki had promised. The second item went in. Loki bit harder, this time on the neck. Brock did not move. The forge produced the Draupnir ring. Every 9th night, it created 8 identical rings of equal weight, an infinite source of gold. Endless treasure from a single object. Loki was now genuinely concerned. Third item, he bit the dwarf directly in the forehead with everything he had. Brock flinched, just for half a second, just long enough to stop the bellows mid-forge. The result was Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, the most powerful weapon in all 9 worlds. With a handle so short, it looked slightly ridiculous. When the gods examined the gifts, they agreed without much debate that all 3 were extraordinary, especially the hammer. Yes, the handle was funny, but a weapon that could destroy anything the giants threw at Asgard was worth a slightly stubby grip. Loki had lost. He turned and walked very quickly toward the exit, then faster. Then he was running. He had magic boots that allowed him to move through air and water, and he used every bit of that magic now. For several days he stayed ahead of the dwarves who wanted his head, and ahead of Thor, who had been asked to bring him back. He almost made it. Thor caught him mid-air and carried him back to Asgard with the cheerful energy of someone who was very much enjoying this. Loki stood in front of Brock and the knife and thought for exactly 1 moment. Then he said, "You are absolutely welcome to my head. A deal is a deal. There was only one small problem. You cannot have my neck. I promised you my head, not my neck. The neck stays with me. So please go ahead and remove the head without touching the neck." Everyone in Asgard went quiet. The gods looked at each other, then at Loki, then at the dwarf holding a knife and trying to figure out the geometry of what had just been proposed. It was technically correct. Brock could not cut off the head without cutting through the neck, and the neck had not been part of the bet. Furious beyond words, the dwarf grabbed a needle and thread and sewed Loki's lips shut instead, then left. Loki stood there with his mouth sewn closed. Here is something important to understand about Loki. He did not plan ahead. Not because he was stupid. He was possibly the most intelligent creature in all 9 worlds. But intelligence without patience is just a very fast way to create problems you did not see coming. Which brings us to the Falcon Cloak. One summer afternoon, Loki was bored. This was always the beginning of something. He borrowed a cloak of feathers from one of the goddesses, a magical garment that transformed the wearer into a falcon, and decided to fly to Jotunheim, the world of the giants, the sworn enemies of every god in Asgard. Why? No reason, just to see what was happening there. He arrived at the fortress of a giant named Geirrod and landed on the highest rock to watch what was going on below. The giants noticed the falcon immediately. Loki watched with genuine amusement as they tried to climb the rock toward him. How exactly did they plan to catch a bird that could simply fly away? The whole thing was entertaining. He waited until they got very close, then tried to take off, and discovered he could not move. Some kind of spell had fixed his feet to the stone. He had been so focused on watching the giants make fools of themselves that he had not noticed the magic being prepared beneath him. The giants grabbed him, put him in a bag, threw him on the floor of the cave. Geirrod examined the falcon carefully and said, "Those are not the eyes of a bird." He was right. Loki was thrown into a chest and left there for 3 months. The giants were not in a hurry. 3 months was nothing to a Jotun. But for Loki, brilliant, restless, allergic to boredom Loki, 3 months in a chest in the dark was something close to madness. When they finally opened the chest, he was ready to agree to almost anything. Geirrod offered him a deal, simple enough. Loki's life in exchange for one favor. Bring Thor to visit, without his hammer. Loki swore the oath and flew back to Asgard. Now, a more principled god might have warned Thor, might have found another solution, might have felt some loyalty to the companion he had traveled with across 9 worlds. Loki went straight to Thor and told him there was a place in Jotunheim where everyone talked about nothing but how impressive Thor was. Beautiful women, great food, everyone desperate to meet him. Just one thing. Out of respect for the hosts, leave the hammer at home. Thor thought about it, then took off the hammer. Loki's role in this particular story ended there. He had made an oath and fulfilled it. What happened next was genuinely not his problem. What happened next was that Thor arrived at Geirrod's fortress without his hammer and discovered very quickly that the beautiful women and admiring crowds did not exist. What did exist was an extremely hostile giant and a hall full of Jotuns who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Thor survived anyway, because Thor without a hammer was still Thor. He borrowed magic gloves from a friendly giantess on the way in and killed everyone in the fortress, including Geirrod himself. Loki heard about this later and felt nothing in particular. He had kept his oath. That was enough. This was the thing about Loki that the gods could never quite decide how to feel about. He would sell anyone for personal advantage without a second thought. But he never technically broke a promise. He just fulfilled them in the most minimal possible way and moved on to the next disaster. The gods of Asgard had one weakness, not strength, not courage, not wisdom. Apples. Specifically, the golden apples kept by a goddess named Idun. Small, ordinary looking, completely unremarkable except for one detail. Without them, the gods aged. Not slowly, not gracefully. Without Idun's apples, the most powerful beings in existence turned into old men and women overnight. Gray hair, wrinkles, hands that shook when they reached for their weapons. The giants had wanted those apples for as long as anyone could remember. And one day, a giant named Thiazi decided to do something about it. He chose his moment carefully. Odin, Heimir, and Loki were traveling through Jotunheim, which raises the question of why 3 gods were casually strolling through enemy territory, but that is a separate issue. When they stopped to cook a bull they had killed for dinner, the fire would not work. They built it up, changed the coals, tried again. Nothing. Then a voice came from a nearby tree. An eagle was sitting there, watching them with obvious amusement. That eagle was Thiazi. He cleared his throat and explained that yes, he was the reason the meat would not cook. Simple magic, easy to undo. All he wanted was to eat first. The gods looked at each other. How much could one bird eat? They agreed. The eagle descended and ate with a speed and thoroughness that left the gods standing with their mouths open. By the time Thiazi was finished, there was almost nothing left. Loki grabbed a stick and hit the eagle across the back as hard as he could. The eagle shot upward in surprise. The stick did not let go. Neither did Loki's hands. He found himself suddenly very high above the ground, moving very fast in a direction he had not chosen, holding a stick attached to a giant eagle who was now laughing. Thiazi flew low enough that Loki was dragged across rocks and trees and hillsides, high enough that letting go was not an option. Loki screamed, begged, promised things. The giant was enjoying every second of it. Eventually, Thiazi made his offer. He would let Loki go, in exchange for one thing: Eden and her apples. Loki, who was currently being scraped across a mountain range, agreed immediately. He returned to Asgard and went to find Eden. Now, the plan Loki came up with to lure the goddess of youth out of the safety of Asgard was not sophisticated. It was not clever. It was barely even a plan. He told her he had found a tree in another world whose fruits looked even better than her apples. Eden said that was impossible. Her apples were the finest in existence. Everyone knew that. Loki said, "Well, if you don't believe me, just come and see for yourself. Bring your apples to compare." That was it. That was the entire plan. Eden picked up her apples and followed him out of Asgard. Thiazi, in eagle form, was waiting. He grabbed Eden and her apples and carried them deep into the mountains of Jotunheim. The gods woke up the next morning with gray hair and shaking hands and immediately understood something was very wrong. It did not take long to figure out who was behind it. Someone had seen Loki talking to Eden before she disappeared. They dragged him in front of the assembled gods and asked for an explanation. Loki looked at a room full of rapidly aging deities and laughed. The gods threatened him with magic that would destroy his mind permanently. Loki stopped laughing. He admitted what had happened, without mentioning that it was entirely his fault, and offered to fix it if someone would lend him the falcon cloak again. He flew to Jotunheim, found Eden, waited until Thiazi went fishing, turned the goddess into a nut, grabbed the apples, flew back toward Asgard as fast as the cloak would carry him. Thiazi returned from fishing to find his prisoner gone. He transformed into an eagle and pursued at full speed. The gods saw two birds approaching Asgard from a distance. A small falcon flying desperately fast, a massive eagle closing the gap behind it. They built a fire along the wall and waited. Loki cleared the wall at the last possible moment and twisted sideways. Thiazi burst through the passage at full speed directly into the flames. His wings caught fire. He crashed to the ground. The gods were waiting. That was the end of Thiazi. The gods got their apples back. Their youth returned. Loki was forgiven. Again. He had created the problem, solved the problem, and walked away with his reputation approximately where it had been before. This was the pattern. For a very long time, this was simply how things worked with Loki. Until it wasn't. Asgard had a problem. The giants attacked constantly. The gods won constantly. But winning every battle was exhausting, and eventually, someone would lose. Asgard needed a wall. Not just any wall. An impregnable fortress wall that no giant army could break through. The kind of construction project that would take years and enormous resources and the labor of hundreds of workers. Then a stranger appeared at the gates. A builder. A wandering giant who said he could construct the wall alone. Impregnable. Perfect. In a single winter, 3 seasons from start to finish. His price was the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freya. The gods laughed, then they consulted each other. Then one of them pointed out that if the builder failed to finish in time, the work would be free. That voice belonged to Loki. His logic was simple. No single builder could possibly complete a wall of that size in one winter. It was physically impossible. So agree to the price. Get as much wall as possible built for free. And when the deadline passes, send him away with nothing. Odin, the wisest of the gods, decided this was an excellent plan. The builder had one condition of his own. His horse would help him. The gods agreed without thinking much about a horse. This was a mistake. Construction began on the first day of winter. During the day, the builder laid stones with a skill and speed that made the gods uncomfortable. At night, his horse dragged stones from the quarry, enormous stones, impossible loads, without stopping, without resting, without slowing down. The wall rose faster than anyone had imagined possible. As the deadline approached, the gods stopped feeling clever and started feeling genuinely afraid. 3 days before the end of winter, the wall was nearly complete. Nearly complete meant the builder had nearly fulfilled his end of the bargain, which meant the sun, the moon, and Freya. The gods turned to Loki. "This was your idea," Odin said. "Fix it." Loki looked at the wall, looked at the horse, looked at the builder, and came up with a solution so straightforward it was almost insulting. The horse was the problem. Without the horse, the builder could not move stones fast enough to finish in time, so the horse needed to be distracted. Loki transformed himself into a mare, a beautiful mare, and walked in front of the builder's stallion with a very deliberate energy. The stallion noticed immediately. It broke free from its harness and charged after Loki across the fields and into the forests and up into the mountains. The builder screamed after it, chased it, could not catch it. Night passed without a single stone being moved. The deadline arrived. The wall was unfinished. The builder understood what had happened. He understood who was behind it. He dropped the pretense of being a wandering craftsman and revealed himself as a Jotun, furious, enormous, ready to destroy everything in front of him. Odin called Thor. Thor killed the builder with one blow. The gods got their wall for free, mostly complete, with one weak spot near the gate, where the final stones had never been laid. That weak spot would matter enormously at Ragnarok. But nobody was thinking about Ragnarok right now. They were thinking about Loki, who had disappeared into the mountains several days ago in the form of a mare and had not yet returned. He came back some months later, leading a foal, 8 legs, gray coat, the most extraordinary horse ever born in any of the 9 worlds. Loki had not just distracted the stallion. He had given birth to Sleipnir, the greatest horse in existence, the animal that Odin himself would ride across the skies. Nobody asked Loki how he felt about this. Nobody asked Loki anything about this. The gods took the horse, gave it to Odin, and moved on as quickly as possible. Loki stood there for a moment, then also moved on. There was nothing useful to say. He had kept his head. He considered this a win. Until now, everything Loki did had a certain logic to it. Bored, caused chaos, fixed chaos, walked away. The gods were frustrated, sometimes furious. But in the end, the damage was always repaired, and Loki was always forgiven, and everything returned more or less to how it had been before. Then came Balder. Balder was the son of Odin and the most beloved god in Asgard. Not because he was the strongest, Thor was stronger. Not because he was the wisest, Odin was wiser. But because he was genuinely, completely, almost unbearably good. Kind to everyone, harmful to no one. The kind of person whose presence made a room feel lighter. Every god in Asgard loved him, which was exactly what made Loki's feelings about him so complicated. It started with a prophecy. Odin went to Osiris and came back with news that nobody wanted to hear. Balder would die. The most beloved god in existence was going to be killed by his own brother. And that death would set in motion the chain of events that ended the world. The gods panicked. Frigg, Balder's mother, sent messengers to every corner of existence, every creature, every plant, every stone and river and flame and disease. She made them all swear an oath that they would never harm Balder. Everything agreed, because everything loved Balder, even the rocks. And it worked. Balder became invulnerable to everything in existence. The gods discovered this quickly and turned it into entertainment. They would gather at feasts and throw things at Balder, weapons, stones, fire, and watch everything bounce off harmlessly, while Balder stood in the middle, smiling. It became a game, a celebration of how beloved he was, how protected, how perfect. Loki watched this from the edges of the hall. He had nothing against Balder personally. Balder had never wronged him, never insulted him, never done anything to deserve what was coming. But something about the whole spectacle was unbearable. The joy on every face, the complete certainty that Balder was special, that Balder was protected, that Balder was loved by everything that existed in all 9 worlds. Everything? Loki started asking questions, quietly, casually, just curious. He found Frigg and asked, surely it must have been exhausting getting every single thing in existence to swear that oath, every creature, every plant, everything. Frigg smiled and said, almost everything. There was one plant she had not bothered with, a small thing, growing on the eastern side of Valhalla. It seemed so gentle and harmless that she had not thought it worth the trouble. Mistletoe. Loki went and found the mistletoe. He cut a branch, sharpened it into something between a dart and a small spear, and came back to the feast where the gods were still throwing things at Balder and laughing. He found Balder's brother Hod standing at the edge of the crowd. Hod was blind. He could not participate in the game, could not see his brother standing in the center of the hall, glowing with divine protection while everyone celebrated around him. Loki sat down next to him. He said, "Would you like to join in?" Hod said he was blind. He would miss. He did not want to spoil the fun. Loki said, "Do not worry about that. I will guide your hand. Here, take this. Throw it toward the center of the hall. I will make sure it goes where it needs to go." Hod took the mistletoe dart, threw it. Loki guided his hand. Balder looked up in surprise at the small object flying toward him. Did not move. Did not think to move. Nothing had ever hurt him. Nothing could hurt him. The mistletoe hit him in the chest. Balder staggered, looked down, fell. The hall went completely silent. The most beloved god in Asgard was dead. Killed in the middle of Asgard where he should have been safest. Killed by his own blind brother who had no idea what he was holding. Killed by the one thing in existence that had never sworn an oath. The gods stood in silence for a long moment. Then every single one of them began to weep. Every god, every creature in Asgard. Even the stones wept for Balder. Loki stood at the edge of the hall and said nothing. Because this time, there was nothing to fix. Balder had not died in battle. He could not go to Valhalla. He went instead to Hel, the realm of the dead ruled by Loki's own daughter, where he would wait in the gray silence until the end of the world. With one act, Loki had done what no giant army had ever managed. He had broken Asgard. Not the walls, not the buildings, something deeper than that. For the first time, the gods looked at each other and understood that the world they had built, perfect and golden and eternal, was not actually any of those things. And nobody had seen it coming. Not even Loki. After the death of Balder, nobody could prove Loki was responsible. They suspected. Of course they suspected. But suspicion was not proof, and Loki said nothing, and the gods were too deep in grief to push harder. Life in Asgard continued, darker than before. quieter. The gold still shone, and the mead halls were still full, but something had gone out of everything. Then came the feast of Aegir. Aegir was the god of the sea, and he threw the greatest feasts in all 9 worlds. Every god and goddess, every important creature in existence, all gathered in his shining hall, eating and drinking and pretending that everything was fine. Loki was there too. He was always there. At some point during the feast, one of Aegir's servants said something that Loki did not like. Nobody remembers exactly what. Something small. Something that would have passed unnoticed on any other night. Loki killed him. Right there in the hall, in front of everyone. The gods exploded. This was Aegir's hall. This was sacred space. You did not do this here. They grabbed Loki and threw him out into the cold. He wandered in the darkness for a while and thought. He thought about every god sitting in that warm hall, every perfect, shining face, every carefully maintained reputation. Every secret he had collected over centuries of traveling and watching and being underestimated by people who thought he was just a nuisance. He knew things. He knew everything. And for the first time in his existence, Loki was tired of being the only one who knew. He walked back into the hall. The music stopped. Every head turned. Loki looked around the room and said, "I have traveled a long way, and I am thirsty. Someone bring me a drink." Nobody moved. One god told him to leave. This was not his place tonight. Loki turned to Odin. They were sworn brothers. Odin had taken an oath that neither of them would drink without the other. Was Odin going to break that oath? In front of everyone? Odin looked at him for a long moment, then told someone to give Loki a drink. Loki took the cup, climbed onto the table, and began. He went through every god in the hall, one by one, systematically, with the precision of someone who had spent centuries paying attention while everyone else was too busy performing their own greatness to notice they were being watched. Freya, he announced, had slept with every god in the room, including her own brother. The god Njord, he said, had a particular arrangement with the goddess of the sea that had nothing to do with gold, despite what Njord preferred people to think. The goddess of the fields, he informed the hall, smelled terrible. Everyone had noticed. Nobody had said anything. Tyr had once lost a hand because of a promise he made and broken. Loki reminded him of exactly how that had happened. He told the hall that Odin, the Allfather, the wisest of all gods, the ruler of Asgard, occasionally dressed in women's clothing to practice a form of magic considered so shameful that no man in Norse society was permitted to use it. Odin said nothing, because it was true. Everything Loki said was true. That was the thing. Standing on that table in Aegir's hall, burning every relationship he had ever had, destroying any possibility of forgiveness, Loki was not lying, not exaggerating, not distorting. He was just saying out loud what everyone already knew and had agreed never to mention. The hall was completely silent. Gods who had been laughing minutes earlier stared into their cups. Nobody could look at each other, because Loki had not just exposed their secrets. He had exposed the agreement they had all made, the silent, comfortable agreement to pretend that the gods of Asgard were worthy of the worship they received. They were not. They were petty, vain, faithless, cruel when it suited them, cowardly when it did not, just like everyone else. Loki stood on the table and told them so. He only stopped when Thor walked into the hall and threatened to end the conversation with his hammer. Loki looked at Thor for a moment, then stepped down from the table. He had said what he came to say. On his way out, he stopped and mentioned, casually, almost as an afterthought, that he knew who had really killed Balder. Then he walked out into the night. The gods sat in silence for a very long time. They knew what came next. Loki understood immediately that he had gone too far. Not because he regretted what he said. Every word had been true. Every secret he had exposed had been real. Every god in that hall had deserved exactly what they got. But there is a difference between being right and being safe. And Loki had just made himself very unsafe. He ran. He found a valley in the mountains with a river running through it and built himself a small house with doors facing every direction so he could see trouble coming from any angle. During the day, he transformed into a salmon and hid in the river. At night, he sat by the fire and tried to think of every possible way the gods might catch him. This was actually useful, because while sitting by the fire imagining fishing nets, he accidentally invented the fishing net. He was holding the prototype in his hands when he looked up and saw Odin watching him from the mountainside. He threw the net into the fire and jumped into the river. But the gods had seen it. They pulled the burned remains from the fire and reconstructed the design. Then they made their own net and stretched it across the river. Loki swam straight into it. He tried to jump over it. Thor was waiting on the other side and caught him mid-air. It was over. The gods carried him to a cave deep in the earth. They brought 3 heavy stones and drove them into the ground. Then they took 2 of Loki's sons, the normal ones, the ones born to his wife Sigyn, and transformed one of them into a wolf. The wolf tore the other one apart. They used the intestines to bind Loki to the stones. The bindings hardened into iron the moment they touched him. He could not break them, could not slip free, could not transform his way out. Then they hung a serpent above his face, not a small one, a serpent positioned so that its venom dripped directly onto Loki's skin, continuously, without stopping, day and night, for eternity, or until Ragnarok, whichever came first. The gods filed out of the cave, all except one. Sigyn stayed, his wife, the goddess who had loved him through everything, the tricks, the chaos, the disasters, the children that were monsters, the years of being the most hated and distrusted figure in Asgard. She had never left him, had never stopped loving him despite every reasonable argument for doing exactly that. She found a bowl and held it over his face to catch the venom before it could reach him. She stood there, hour after hour, day after day, the bowl slowly filling. When it was full, she had to turn away to empty it. In those moments, the few seconds when she was gone, the venom hit Loki's face. His reaction shook the earth, not metaphorically. The ground actually moved, trembled, split. The Norse explained earthquakes this way. Somewhere deep below the surface, Loki was in pain, and the world felt it. And Sigyn came back, held the bowl over his face again, waited again. This was her eternity. Not Valhalla, not the gray halls of hell, just a cave and a bowl, and the man she loved chained to a rock beneath her. Nobody wrote much about Sigyn. She did not cause chaos, or forge legendary weapons, or reshape the world with her decisions. She just stayed, in a cave, holding a bowl. In a mythology full of gods doing enormous, dramatic things for complicated reasons, Sigyn simply loved someone and refused to leave. Make of that what you will. As for Loki, he lay there in the dark and waited. He had all the time in the world now. And somewhere in the long silence between drops of venom, he thought about what was coming. He knew the prophecies as well as anyone, better than most. He knew what Ragnarok looked like, who would die, who would survive, how the new world would begin. He knew his own role in it, and he waited. The signs came slowly at first, a winter that did not end. 3 years of cold and darkness with no summer between them. The sun growing weaker each day until it barely rose at all. Then the wolf that had been chasing the sun across the sky for centuries finally caught it. The stars went out. Mountains collapsed. Trees fell. Every chain and shackle and binding that had ever been used to hold something dangerous in place, all of them broke simultaneously, as if the world itself had decided it was done pretending things were under control. In a cave deep beneath the earth, Loki felt the iron around his wrists dissolve. He stood up for the first time in longer than he could remember, stretched, walked out into the darkness. The world was ending. Everything the gods had built over thousands of years was coming apart at the seams. The careful order, the golden halls, the agreements and oaths and hierarchies that had kept Asgard functioning since before humans existed, all of it collapsing. Loki looked at the chaos and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. At home. He went to find his children. Fenrir, the wolf who had spent centuries bound by an unbreakable magic chain forged by dwarves, had already broken free. He ran with his mouth open so wide that his upper jaw scraped the sky and his lower jaw dragged along the earth. Everything between was destroyed. Jormungandr, the world serpent who had coiled around the ocean floor for so long that he had become part of the geography of the world, rose from the depths and began to move toward land. The seas followed him, poisonous waves washing over everything. Hell opened her gates and sent her armies upward. Every soul who had ever died without a sword in their hand. Every person who had lived quietly and died of old age or illness or simple bad luck. All of them marching now. Loki took command of a ship made from the fingernails and toenails of the dead and sailed toward Asgard. The giants of Jotunheim followed. The bridge between the worlds, the rainbow bridge that the gods had used to travel across existence since the beginning of time, shattered under the weight of what was coming. The gods armed themselves. Odin rode Sleipnir, the 8-legged horse that Loki had given birth to in a mountain meadow a very long time ago, into the final battle. He fought Fenrir. The wolf swallowed him whole. Thor faced the world serpent. They killed each other simultaneously. Thor managed 9 steps after the killing blow before the serpent's venom took him. Freyr fought without his sword. He had given it away for a woman he loved and never replaced it. He died for that choice. And Loki found Heimdall. Heimdall was the guardian of the bridge between worlds, the watchman of Asgard, the god who saw everything coming from miles away, and whose hearing was so sharp he could detect the sound of grass growing. He had been Loki's opposite in every way: order against chaos, watchfulness against impulsiveness, certainty against doubt. They had hated each other for as long as either could remember. They fought at the edge of everything and killed each other. Loki fell. The battle ended not with a victory, but with an ending. Gods and giants and monsters all destroying each other until there was almost nothing left. The sun went out completely. The earth sank into the sea. Silence. Then, the earth rose again, green and clean. Waterfalls running down new mountains into rivers nobody had named yet. Eagles circling above forests that had never been touched. A new world, built on the wreckage of the old one. Baldur emerged from hell, alive again. The death that had started everything was undone in the new beginning. He became the chief god of a world that had no need for war or chains or carefully maintained secrets. A small group of gods had survived, young ones mostly, gods who had not yet accumulated enough history to be destroyed by it. And a man and a woman emerged from a forest where they had hidden during the destruction. and began again. Loki was not there. He had played his role, set everything in motion, torn down the old world so a new one could exist. Whether that was the plan all along, nobody can say. Because here is the thing about Loki that the gods never quite understood, and that Marvel never bothered to explain. He was not trying to destroy Asgard. He was not consumed by hatred or ambition or a desire for revenge. He was the thing that every perfect system eventually produces: the pressure valve. The crack in the foundation that appears not because someone put it there, but because no foundation is actually perfect, no matter how much everyone agrees to pretend it is. The gods of Asgard were not good. They were powerful. There is a difference. They took what they wanted, broke the promises they found inconvenient, punished anyone who pointed out the gap between what they claimed to be and what they actually were. Loki pointed at that gap his entire life, sometimes as a joke, sometimes as chaos. Once, at Aegir's feast, as something that looked almost like honesty. And they chained him to a rock for it. He was not the villain of this story. He was the story's only honest character, which in Asgard amounted to the same thing. The gods are gone now. The old world is gone. The careful order and the golden halls and the agreements that held everything together, all of it dissolved in the final winter. What remains is a question that the myth never quite answers. Was Loki the reason the world ended? Or was he the reason a better one could begin?